Nice. So yeah, we'll really look at cracking your flow code. So how you can use HRV to actually step into the whole peak performance space. And yeah, so the angle that I'm really coming from is I'm trained engineer previously in the mechanical space and then moved into energy engineering and ultimately human behavior design, because I realized, well, we can make more energy efficient televisions, but then people buy bigger televisions. So ultimately we have absolutely won nothing unless we change human behavior. And so I then did lots of research, published 12 papers and presented that work internationally. And yeah, while I was in my 20s, really like doing lots of this, like studying abroad and working at different research institutions, I ended up basically working, living, traveling in 50 different countries and just meeting thousands of people and realizing in these very kind of heart-to-heart conversations, because I'm a deeply curious person about like, why do you live the way you live? And how does it make you feel? I really understood that there's so many different structures and mindsets that actually keep people sort of like where they're at. And it's not necessarily that they know from the inside out what's right for them, but it's much more like these outer constraints that actually keep them going as they are. And so I then started looking a lot into this human performance movement and kind of like optimal performance, and came across Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel with their Flow Genome project and this book of Stealing Fire, where it's all about like communitas and these like great experiences that we can have when we come together as a group of people. And then most recently, my friend Susan Brown, who was early on working with Steve Jobs, started this project of tokenizing the state of flow. And it was, for me, a really interesting exchange that we had, because we had this conversation of flow that either happens kind of in the heart or happens in the head. And so Stephen Kotler looks very much at like how flow comes kind of like from the headspace, like what kind of chemicals do we get when we step into a state of flow, while Susan is very much looking at how do we have like a whole body experience where our skin resistance changes, and what she calls flow is a cosmic orgasm. So where we're suddenly becoming these missions for sort of like higher ideas. And there's a lot of like interesting research that actually backs it up, that we are operating from a very different state when we're in a state of flow. And so for me, also how I got into this whole flow state and this research around flow was much my spiritual journey over the last sort of like 5 to 10 years, and looking at different traumata and addictions and having really this kind of like trauma and addiction aware approach. Because flow is one of the most addictive states on earth. And it seems like we're designed to be turned on by the chemicals that our body can produce. And I feel that also connects very much with this whole movement towards like purpose and find like what is it that makes you be your best. Now, when we really look at like what flow is, so flow is this amazing state where we behave and feel and do our best work. And we're so immersed in what we're doing, and we're feeling so energized that just the enjoyment of this process becomes such a sort of like reason to do it in itself. And we don't need any external motivators like money or anything anymore. It's just like, it makes us feel so good that you want to keep doing it. Now, what flow feels like is, when we look at Stephen Kotler's and Jamie Will's research, it has these these 4 main components, where one of them is richness. So the experience, like the moment, feels so rich. Sound becomes more vibrant. Colors become in a way more exquisite. Like when we taste something, it tastes somehow better. And then there's also this amazing effortlessness to it. So we are in this state where just one action flows to the next, and it feels like everything is easy. There is no pushing, but it feels like we're sort of like pulled along on a certain journey. Third component is this sense of timelessness, where Could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour, we don't know. It just we're sort of lost. There is no past and no future. It's everything is present. And that's, I think, also why the flow state is called the deep now. It's like everything is happening now. There is this concept of time suddenly disappears. And also the concept of self disappears. And what I'm noticing for myself is when I come out of the flow state, it's like, oh man, I am really, really hungry. Or I really need to go to the bathroom. And it's like 5 minutes earlier, I didn't notice it. But as kind of like the flow state wears off, it's like, wow, actually my body needs something that I need to attend to. Can everybody only see a black screen? Yeah, really? Oh, that's annoying. All right, let's try this again. How's that?
That's better.
That's better. Good. Thank you, Jen.
I thought you're just winging it, Toby.
Totally. Do this in my sleep. No, I actually brought some visuals so you can also, have the double stimulation. Good. Now, as Alex, you were saying earlier with Csikszentmihalyi. So yeah, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, he's the godfather of like positive and flow psychology. And with one of his colleagues, Jean, he was coming up with just basically 6 characteristics. And the 2 that basically Jimmy Wheel and Stephen Kotler aren't really looking at it so much is really that flow is this autotelic experience, where it becomes this reason and intrinsically rewarding in itself. And what's really interesting about autotelic is that addictive is another word for autotelic, but in the research community, obviously, don't really want to talk about like addictive things. But yeah, that's really important. And then also what's important is this merging of like action and awareness, where like what you do, it's really connected with this piece of self and environment. When we step into doing something, we're aware of doing it, but it already leads to the next action. So there's no longer really this sense of separation, but it's this wonderful unity that really comes from it. And we have this deep sense of personal power. So there's this concept of a challenge skills balance, so that we basically want a challenge that's only about 4% higher than what we can usually do, so that we feel slightly challenged. There's the sense of novelty, but we're not feeling over challenged, so that we become overwhelmed. And then we're in this amazing state of like personal control. We feel like we are totally like at it and we're on it, and it keeps us going. So those were the 2 that I wanted to pull out. And from sort of like a brain chemistry point of view, there's, as also Stephen Kotler and Jimmy Wheel talk about, this loss of sort of like self-consciousness, and also this loss of time. And where this originates from is that, so in our brain, sort of like in our prefrontal cortex, that's where our self, or our sense of self exists. And that's also where the concept of time exists. And when we step into a state of flow, what happens is that we're experiencing this transient hypofrontality, which means that our prefrontal cortex is going offline. So effectively, we are operating without that part of our brain. So our body is effectively operating with a different hardware configuration, if you want. And with that, we're having different experiences, where we're no longer really having that inner critic that's existent. And it's also not so much that strategizing of like, oh, what do I need to do in these like future steps, but it's more like, okay, like what is the next adjacent possibility? And so one of my mentors from Norway, he was previously a professor at Stanford University, and he wrote this paper of, basically he's the front-end innovation, and he called it dancing with ambiguity. The big concept for him was that we're here, that there's all these adjacent possibilities. and just step into the next possibility and then reevaluate again, rather than thinking 5 steps ahead. Only always go to the next step and then see what are the possibilities that exist, and then really stringing yourself along in that way. Now, a fun thing is now the neurochemicals of flow, and that leads to this whole like addiction thing that I was speaking about previously. So when we get these 5 different chemicals that flow produces for us, it's one of the most potent neurochemical cocktails that exists. And in the breathwork space, Wim Hof talks about, get high on your own supply. In the flow space, it's effectively this same thing. So what we get is we get norepinephrine, which comes from our kidneys. Then we get dopamine. And both of these chemicals, they are increasing our pattern recognition. So we're suddenly much more able to combine new bits of information. So that's, again, innovation, creativity. And what goes up is the rate of how quickly we can process data. So in some ways, being a normal computer, we're suddenly becoming a supercomputer. And the exciting piece in this is that it also increases the signal to noise ratio. So instead of seeing all the distractions, we're basically just beginning to see what it is that we're really wanting to see. Then anandamide, it's similar to THC, but it's produced within our body, and it allows us to do these like far-flung connections. And that's really where breakthrough innovation is coming from. So you have these disparate ideas, and then with anandamide, you're able to combine them into something novel, something new, something that just hasn't existed before. And then you get serotonin and endorphins. So both of them make you feel really good in your body. So if any of you are runners or so, endorphins, kind of the runner's high, that's where you just feel like, oh, I fucking did it, and it's amazing, and I want to do it again. So, and the interesting piece with all these flow chemicals is that you are giving your body basically this like massive like dump of like feel-good chemicals. Now, what happens when you have all these feel-good chemicals is that the experience that you're having gets basically tagged. And the more chemicals your body releases in a certain experience, the more your brain is, this is cool, let's go back to this, this made us feel good. And Gianna, what is your question?
More of a thought. So I understand the addiction level, for example, if you think about sports or art, you just want to continue doing it. But if you think about procrastination, and like based on the assumption that, you would feel kind of addicted to that feeling, you want to have it again. Why is it so hard to find focus if it makes you feel good? And yeah, I guess there is, you said something at the beginning of the session between flow from your heart and from your head. Mm-hmm. And I have kind of like these two scenarios. So for example, for me, it's super easy to start artwork and I get lost, in time, forget everything about time. I'm really just in the flow, in my moment, no distractions, all of the characteristics basically. But when it's about work, it seems like such a hard hurdle to conquer. Once I'm in, it's great, and information flows, and I'm working at such high performance, but so hard, getting into it. Just a thought. I guess it's not a, yeah.
There's two thoughts I want to add to it. It's a bit like in chemistry, where you have some exothermic reactions, they need a level of activation energy. So you need to basically put energy in to a certain degree. And once you hit that threshold, then the reaction happens by itself. And that's similar with flow, where it really has this sort of like on-ramp and you need to get into it. And that's in some ways where it requires, and we'll get to that towards the end, but it requires this like real intense focus so that you're able to start this neurochemical release basically. Because once you're in it, then boom, it does it by itself. And the other component is that flow sort of like lasts. So when you say, you know, art enables you to get into the state of flow, for me, it's road cycling, for example. And the fun piece is basically you could do art to sort of like get your on-ramp into that flow state and then leave it at transition over to your workspace. And then you have your body primed for that chemical release and you're just like shifting environment. And so that's often what happens for me. I'm actually often doing at the end of the day, a lot of road cycling. But then I get all these like crazy good ideas that I'm excited to, you know, work on the next day. So I feel that's again, you know, basically crack the code that works for you.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'll give that a try.
Awesome. Nice. So we'll get to like why flow matters sort of like in the business context now. And there's some two really interesting studies. One is done by McKinsey, and they were studying their employees' productivity and the increase when they were in a flow state compared when they're not in a flow state. And so what they found is that basically people in a flow state are 500% more effective than people not in a flow state. So what this means is if you're in a flow state, you can go to work on Monday, take basically Tuesday to Friday off, do whatever the fuck you want. And you're still at the same level of productivity as your steady state peers. And Flow Genome Project, they've done a study on flow and creativity. And maybe particularly also for you, Jenna, it's really interesting to see that it makes you 500 to 700% more creative, and creativity being one of the main soft skills in the 21st century. So what really becomes apparent to me that is, well, the more we're able to access our flow, the more we're able to actually thrive in a world that's continuously changing and molding, and where long-term planning is no longer really so predictable, because we need to be much more present, like in the moment, and be responsive to actually the changing market conditions or customer needs, whatever it is. Now, flow is really this optimal state of consciousness where we're balanced basically between the outside world and our inside world. And so we're focused on, yeah, this oneness of like, this is me and this is the outside, and how do I influence the outside, and how does the outside sort of influence my inside. And from a brainwave perspective, it's exciting because usually when we're awake, we're in a beta brainwave state. And especially when we drink coffee, then we get even like more beta brainwaves, which makes us feel very, very like outward focused. And then what flow states do, they drop our brainwaves into more a daydreaming and dreaming state while we're awake. And so we're having access to that world of, yeah, bigger possibility, while we're also able to actually make that possibility real. Now, we also get near perfect high-speed decision-making. So I was saying earlier, you know, we are suddenly much more effective in processing big amounts of data, because we're connecting much more to our intuition. So it's not just rational thinking and evaluating, which is fairly slow, but we're basically tapping into our subconscious that is processing data beyond what our mind usually can. And yeah, the last piece is really this brain hemisphere synchronization, where, you know, some people say you have like an analytical brain, sort of like a creative brain. And I look at it also in terms of like more the masculine and the feminine components, but it's ultimately, it's becoming this amazing dance of rational thought with more like intuitive guidance, and then kind of back and forth, back and forth. So what researchers have found is basically there's like 22 different flow triggers, and they're listed here. So Right, Sazali has put this together. So I just want to highlight a couple, and there's effectively three main categories. So there's external triggers that come from the outside. Then there is internal triggers that obviously come from within, and then there's group flow triggers, as where humans are this creative, very much social species. Now, when it comes to external triggers, the big piece is really like action adventure sports is really a great way to get into flow, where it's like high consequences. So I'm at the moment super into like road cycling, and I'm really fucking loving when it's like heavy traffic, lots of pedestrians, and obviously consequences high because, you know, if I mess up, could get significantly hurt or die. But just like finding the gap, it's such a turn on for me. So like navigating the urban slalom at like all times, and instead of seeing the obstacles being like the pedestrians and the cars and the trucks and the buses, it's like there's always a possibility. And I feel it's really this like beautiful lesson for life where, you know, like everything is always changing, but there's always a path to continue. And the other external trigger that I want to highlight is novelty, which I feel is very much connected to people's need for traveling. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I've been like sedentary or like stable for a while, and then I need to go and do something different. And the interesting piece there is as well, especially when you go to countries where you don't speak the language, you know, you're suddenly disabled to some degree. And I noticed when I was going to Turkey that didn't speak a word. And so all I needed to do is basically like focus on my intuition. And it was a weird experience in some way. But I felt that there were different modes of communication that I usually don't really use, because I'm quite, I like words and the creation of meaning from them. And then I want to highlight on the internal flow triggers, the clarity of goals. And, you know, when people talk about like setting smart goals, for example, it's really, really important that you know when you achieved it. Because the moment you achieve it, it's one of these dopamine hits. And that's also where it's really exciting to set like a big goal and then do lots of small goals along the way, because it optimizes that you get dopamine hit after dopamine hit after dopamine hit after dopamine hit. And so it's basically you're creating your own system to continuously be engaged with your bigger goal. And when we come to like one thing from the group flow triggers, so close and deep listening. And that's, I feel, often what we experience in good friendships or in partnerships, when somebody really just gives us space and they just listen, and we can talk and talk more and talk a bit more. And then at the end, you feel like, wow, there's things that have come out of me that I didn't think would come out. And there's also the sense of deep connectivity to the other person and really feeling that sense of being cherished for like who one is. So yeah, I feel we'll leave it at that in terms of the triggers, unless anybody has questions on it. Sweet. Right. So let's look a bit on pathways into flow, and that's really where we're now moving towards the HRV space as well, to kind of understand oneself better and then see, okay, how can I optimize myself to get into the state of flow? So first piece is always, it needs relaxed awareness. And then once you're in a state of relaxed awareness, then you can bring in your focused attention. And that focused attention then leads you into the flow space. Now, what this means really on a nervous system level is that, first of all, you need to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So the nervous system that's basically the rest and digest nervous system, you know, the one that focuses the energy within, where if you close your eyes, you know, you notice more how you breathe. Maybe you notice kind of like how your left knee is feeling, or your right pinky. Or, it's just this awareness of like, what is actually my body doing? And the interesting piece is that really through breathing is the only conscious way in which we can actually influence our nervous system balance. And so if you focus more on the out breath, then you activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So a cool technique is that you breathe in for 4 seconds and breathe out for 7. And also breathe out through the mouth like a little. And then it drops you more into this parasympathetic, relaxed state. And then what you do after that is you get really clear on your goal and your intention and kind of this focus point, whether it's like a work session or whether it's like a creative pursuit that you're getting into. And then it's really this parasympathetic this sympathetic activation. And so sympathetic, the whatever like layman's term is like the fight, flight, freeze sort of like fawn part, where really the energy kind of goes out and you're looking for the danger in a sense of when you're in this fight flight state. But what I really see with the sympathetic activation is that it's your energy moving out, but it doesn't need to move out because there's a danger. It can just move out because you want to create something on the outside world. And so to activate your sympathetic nervous system, it's to really focus on the in-breath. And so what you can do, there's this breath of fire, for example, where it's almost like hyperventilating. So, and you can take some deeper exhales and some shorter exhales. So it allows you to, and if you just do this focus on the in-breath, you will feel after probably like 10, 15 that your body is kind of like it's ramping up. And you can also make this even more intense if you breathe in through the mouth. And that's, when you recognize, for example, when you start running or something, at some point you may no longer just breathe through your nose, but you want more air, and so you're breathing in through your mouth as well. Now, quick piece on the nervous system pieces here, and just want to draw the attention to, first of all, when you get sympathetically activated, so your fight or flight piece, then your kidneys secrete epinephrine, norepinephrine being one of these flow chemicals. Now, the other piece is also on your pupils. It's really interesting that when you relax, your pupils constrict, so they really limit how much light gets into your system. They limit how much information is actually coming in that you need to process. While when you're getting into a sympathetic activation, your pupils dilate, you get more light in. There's much more this focus of like, oh, what are the things that are happening outside of me that I need to process? And also with regards to the breathing again, like your lungs here in the parasympathetic state, they constrict because you feel you actually need less air because you're not really like doing anything and your system is just in this state of like homeostasis. While when you're getting into a sympathetic state where your body is ready to be activated to actually do something, then your airways increase so that more oxygen can move in and then more carbon dioxide can move out again. So now when it comes to really how the nervous system interacts with the heart, it's really, really interesting that the parasympathetic nervous system slows the heartbeat down, and then the sympathetic nervous system speeds it up. Makes complete sense that on the one hand, your body's down regulating, on the other side, it's up regulating. What's now interesting is that the heart is connected to obviously both strands of the nervous system, and it gets signals from both sides. And depending on what signal is stronger, the heart speeds up, or if the signal from the parasympathetic nervous system is stronger, then the heartbeat tends to slow down. Now, with heart rate variability, what it really means is our heart isn't like a metronome, so it's not regular. But it actually, some heartbeats are faster, some heartbeats are slower. And the more of that variability that you have, the more you are adaptable to relax or to actually do something. Does that make sense? So, and basically the ways that we can measure what's going on within our heart, I mean, in the medical setting, you may have seen like the image that I have here in the back, where you get hooked up to these cool electrodes and then it shows you how your heart is beating. Now, with lots of cool new technology, basically you have like all these sensors that you can have yourself. There's primarily two different ways. So one is electrodes, so where you get really the electrical signal of the heart being measured, and then the other one is light. So from the electrodes, there's chest belts. You basically put them on your chest, on your skin, and then there's like 2 electrodes in the back, and they read the signal that your heart is producing, like every heartbeat. And that is so I'm using the kit here from Autonom Health, and there's also different chest belts from Sunto or Viva or Polar or Garmin. Basically, all work in the same way, just different companies that make them. Now, the other part is that you measure your heartbeat through light. And it's actually quite fun, because you could even just use it with your smartphone. And there's an app called Valtteri, and it uses your camera and one of the you use the flash and one of the camera lenses, and you just put your finger on, and then you see on your screen this pulsating image of like darker red and lighter red and darker red and lighter red. And that's all it really does. It's like pattern recognition of that oscillation. Apple Watch does effectively the same thing, but more sophisticated way. And you have Whoop straps, Aura rings that you can wear on your finger, Fitbits, all work with light, and they measure how basically your heart is beating, and then you see, okay, what is the time difference between these different heartbeats? And as I said earlier,
very quick question. Sorry if you touched on that already. What is, if you just go back to the previous slide, what's the accuracy of electrodes versus light? And what's the difference of measuring one or the other?
So there's a couple components. Obviously, electrodes are always much more accurate, because first of all, they measure actually the electrical signal, because your heart, it has an electromagnetic field, and like the contraction arises through like an electric impulse. So it actually measures the clean signal, and it measures it where it originates. So it measures it at your heart. While then when you do light, I mean, first of all, my arm is obviously sort of like, I don't know, 80 centimeters away from my heart. It's further away from the source. And then the other piece is as well, it measures it indirectly. So what it measures is, it measures basically just the difference in the image. So, and I did some interesting experiments with the Whoop strap when I had it, and I, for example, like shook my arm really, really quickly. My heart rate variability went massively up. It's like, holy shit. All I've done is like shake my arm, and it gives me a super, super different signal. Now, I feel they probably worked on their algorithms since then. But so I'm using both. So I'm having an Apple Watch, and I use it for getting a glimpse of like what my heart rate variability is, and how my sort of like daily state of well-being emerges. But then when I want to do experiments with myself and see like, okay, like what thing works, what thing doesn't work, then I always go to the chest belt and actually like have some real solid data. Because I mean, it's just not as pleasant to wear like this thing all the time, while it's much easier to wear like a watch or a ring or something. Does this answer your question, Gianna? Amazing, sweet. So as I was saying earlier, it's really only that conscious breathing can shift our nervous system balance, and I feel that's really when we'll now get into more of the analytics on heart rate variability. So I'll introduce you a bit to this chest belt. It comes with this evaluation software that's created by a company called Autonom Health. And now when we look at really discovering your flow potential, like what's really, really important is actually that you get an understanding of, do you have reserves to actually flow? Because one of the things with flow is that flow is this immensely high energy state. So if you do a lot of flow, you also need to do a lot of good recovery. So Stephen Kotler, for example, I think he has a sauna in his house that he goes in every evening just to chill him out again. For me, it's doing Epsom salt baths. And yeah, just getting these minerals back into the body and getting heat. And I tend to go to the sauna once a week. Yeah, and what's quite interesting when you wear this chest belt and do like a 24-hour measurement, then what you get is the images that you see here on the right. And what it's called a live fire, because it looks like basically like a fire. And when you look here at the image at the top, you see the flames are going high, which shows that you have energy. There's a good variability within your heart. So you have heartbeats that go really fast, some go really slow. And there's just a degree of adaptability that you have. And if you have that, then you're in a state where you can actually get into flow, because you are able to relax your nervous system enough and then activate it powerfully. Well,
and is that just showing, so is that just showing HRV measurement, or is there something else in that visualization?
So it shows the HRV, but not sort of like in a time domain. So it doesn't say, okay, this was like 875 milliseconds, and this is like 1,700 or 1,200 milliseconds. But what it does, it does a Fourier transformation. So it makes a time signal into a frequency domain. And so then the color indicates the level of intensity, like how many heartbeats are you basically having in specific frequency bands. And so here at the very bottom, that frequency band is showing the basically the core processes of your bodies. So kind of breathing, digestion, these just fundamental. Then when you go here to the 0.1 frequency band, this is the frequency band that shows your sympathetic activation. So it shows the energy that you have available in your muscles, for example. And then really that ability to do something in the world. And then here, the higher band, about like, you see 0.2 to 0.5. That's also here where you see all the like high signals. So that's when there is sleep. And that's really that frequency band where you're much more focused inward and present basically with the internal processes that your body is running. Does this make sense for you, Gianna?
Yes, it does. I have one more question, and I think we already talked about it, but I can't remember. So I can see these different icons in the top, right? For example, resting and so on. Is that something that that the app automatically identifies? So if you're in this restful state, that it tags it as sleeping, or do you go in there yourself and tag it afterwards just to validate, I guess, what you've been doing in that time frame?
Yeah, no, it's something that I tag myself, and I actually tag it like while I'm doing it. So it draws even an extra level of conscious awareness to, am I again sitting on my computer? Or, how much time do I actually spend eating? So there is some good training in that as well. And yeah, then on the other hand, when you look here at the lower image, that's really that state of burnout where ultimately your flames are hardly existent. And so if you want to actually try to get into flow states while you're at the state of burnout, first thing is, okay, let's move you actually into a state of decent health again before you have the energy to actually sustain a flow state. Then it's really ultimately a lot about self-discovery here as well. Like, what is really your baseline? And because before I started doing this, I didn't know what feeling good actually felt like. Because it was just so normal. And I guess like all of us, we have this modus operandi that's just normal for us. It feels like, this is like who we are. But then when you sort of like get some data on where you're actually at, it allows you to make changes that you previously wouldn't even have thought about being able to make them. Then I also want to talk about really the level of like self-compassion that heart variability can bring, and where we can find flow triggers and things that were actually previously more addictive tendencies. Because our body has a lot of wisdom. So when I was going through uni, specifically in the States, where I was like just intense pressure and so many assignments that needed to be done all the time, what I observed in myself was like, I was really like reverting to porn really often. And what at the time, it really made me feel that I really struggled with it, because it felt like this intense pressure to perform, but then also feeling I was doing behaviors that were societally not acceptable. And so when I then got into this whole like heart variability space, at one point I was like, man, I want to actually know like what my body was doing in these spaces and why I was doing it. So I started putting on this like measurement device, and so I put 2 graphs in here that actually like showed us. So these areas with heart is like masturbation and like lovemaking sessions. And what I noticed is actually that what my body was looking to do is finding a state of equilibrium. Is what you see here in that graphic. I was actually like pretty stressed, and very much in sort of like a lower state of like energy and reserves. And then when I was engaging with sexual behaviors, I realized like, wow, actually, there's suddenly a lot of energy in my body. And when I then look deeper into it, like, why is this happening? It's like, because I start breathing differently. Instead of, having my attention just like focused on a monitor the whole time, which like a narrow field of attention is creating stress in the body, I was being much, much more present with my entire environment. And I was much more present also like with my partner. And I was like, cool. Actually, what I'm learning from this is I could do breath work. I could do potentially just shorter stints at my computer, so that instead of like putting my body in this like deep state of stress, maybe work 45 minutes on my computer, then go away and do something that's much more like peripheral vision, so that I'm, again, moving myself into a more parasympathetically activated state. But then it also allowed me to just feel this level of compassion of like, man, thank you, body. You are really fucking intelligent. And you're wanting me to be in that state of homeostasis. And you're just finding the pathways that are the ones that you know. And so there was suddenly this dissolving of sort of like shame into, man, I actually know what my body wants, and I can find different ways if I choose to. And so I feel for anyone who's struggling with behaviors that you actually don't want, could be a really, really beautiful way of figuring out like, why are you doing what you're doing? And are there substitute behaviors that you can bring in? And again, coming back to that, effectively flow lasts for much, much longer than the sort of like flow state itself. When I was in uni and doing these assignments and then going to Poland and going back to the assignments, I was like, man, actually, I was drawing these flow chemicals into then writing my papers, which actually performed really fucking well. And so it's like, wow, this is really, really interesting to see how there's this inner wisdom that may not at all times be congruent with a kind of like societal programming. And so having that level of self-insight, I feel can really, set one free. At least that's what it did for me. And last piece then is on really just cracking your flow code. And so I'm finding the practices that really focus your energy. And for me, I put in here a graphic of, I do this like Buddhist chanting. And so it's an active meditation where I have my eyes open, I focus on a scroll with some cool characters. And then I chant this Nam Myoho Renge Kyo mantra over and over and over. And it's really, really interesting what it does. So when you look at the live fire here, chanting this mantra focuses all my energy in really this sympathetically activated state. So I'm effectively choosing to put my body into a state of stress. But it, I think, also comes back to what you were saying earlier, like you're in a like positive state of stress. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. Because previously, before I chant, I tend to do a like short few minutes of parasympathetic breathing. So basically breathing that focuses on the exhale. So I'm allowing my body to relax. And then I have my little book where I have like all my goals written down that I'm wanting to focus on. And then I'm doing usually between sort of like 30 minutes and an hour of this like active chanting meditation. So I'm putting myself into that state of like positive stress. And I find it super interesting that all the energy really condenses in focusing on what I want to achieve. Now, I say really find the practices that focus your energy, because that's the thing that works for me. And the interesting piece is like with heart rate variability technology, you can test whatever you want, like whether it's a yoga thing or whether it's having a specific like walking routine or even just a specific day structure that potentially produces results or doesn't produce results. It allows you basically to have this conversation with yourself where it's less about listening to somebody else saying, yeah, this is what you should try. And then you try it and it doesn't work. It's like, okay, let me have this exchange with myself, basically. Try a bunch of different things, see what my data says. Obviously, always most important is like, see how you feel doing it. And then having a look at the data. And so you're able to then have this conversation with yourself from a much, much more well-rounded perspective, where it's not just you basically assessing yourself from how you've always been feeling, but then also getting this extra layer of information of basically a dashboard for your body. Like, what does feeling good look like? And is how you're feeling right now, which is normal, potentially actually a really non-optimal state of being. And that is really where I see the really big possibility that we're sort of like at this beginning of a great voyage towards personal sovereignty, where now we're having technology that allows us to really look within, and it's super freaking cheap and accessible. And yeah, it's a very democratic way where we no longer need to rely necessarily on somebody's opinion, but we can test ourselves and really develop that beautiful relationship with, wow, I'm the steward of me. And yeah, with that, I want to actually finish today. And if anyone wants to like go deeper into the space, we can talk more in depth about specific topics. If there's any questions, can also cover them, because we're getting to the top of the hour and I want to be conscious of time that everyone put in.
That was really interesting. Thanks, Toby. I have to drop off to another call, but I'm sure we'll have some follow-up chats on that. Are you going to share the slides maybe? Or
yeah, so I'll send an email tomorrow with the recording and with the slides as well.
Sounds good. Cool.
Beautiful.
Thanks. Have a good
Much
evening.
love.
Bye.
Bye, Jana. Buddy, Alex,
hey.
Gary, Xavi, Julia, if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
I've got a quick question. If you go back to that slide, I think it might be the third one with the the various chemicals that the brain that are implicated in flow states.
Yeah.
So my first question about it was, there was how much research can you say a little bit about the research that is behind this? Like for, were people doing like remote association tests and blood draws before and after? Or, how do we know that particular chemicals are associated, especially with different kinds of creativity, which is a pretty bold claim. So that's my first question.
Right. Okay. So with regards to the research and the blood tests, so what I know from the flow research Flow Research Collective, what they've been doing is they were basically, drawing blood and then putting people in flow states. And the interesting thing that you can do as well is you can induce flow states artificially through electromagnetic resonance.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were evaluating the blood afterwards again. So
Okay.
that is that piece that they've been running.
Okay. I suppose, the second question, my second question is that, and this is something I struggle with sort of in the stuff that I've written sort of around, around this, which is how much the brain science matters. I mean, in the sense that, it's certainly cool to be able to sort of point to research that suggests associations between these, sort of that kind of that helps us understand some of the sort of biochemistry of sort of these states. But until we get to this, unless we are driving toward taking a pill that induces flow, how much does this matter for people kind of who are trying to figure out how to, sort of how to get more of this in their own lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's simply a piece of information. Kind of what happens within your body.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's really about the behaviors that allow you to stimulate the secretion of these chemicals within.
Right. I mean, the thing is that, I'm thinking about the degree to which talking about flow this way may, may make it seem harder to achieve than we want. That, and I think, here's the thing, you think about like Seth Roberts' work on self-experimentation, right? That classic article. Yeah, he was keeping track of a whole bunch of things, how happy he felt in the morning, etc. But I don't recall like him having, him measuring heart rate or blood pressure or doing any more the heart rate variability. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I get from that is that there's an awful lot that you can learn from prolonged self-reflection, regardless of what kind of technology that you're using. Yeah. And I think that the challenge always, I think, with this stuff is to sort of encourage the self-reflection and to see the tools simply as tools rather than obstacles. Right.
100%. I mean, that's the whole point, because ultimately, what does it lead to? Like ultimately, right. it's about breath. The ancient sages like 5,000 years ago have said that. And when I speak on podcasts about like heart rate variability, it's always like, man, it's just a fucking piece of data. Yes, if it supports you in some way, cool. However, and that's what I also said here in the presentation, check in with how you feel. Because some mornings when I look at my heart rate variability, it's like, oh man, just take it easy. And I'm like, no, I am really freaking in flow today and I'm going to crush it. And it's just like that it's obviously, like how do I feel? And then that number or little paragraph, it's really just one of these like reflection moments. Do I agree? Do I not agree? Mm-hmm. And sometimes it pulls out something interesting that I wasn't aware of. So, and that's, I think, where the technology has a reason, right. especially since we live in a world where there is so much wanting guidance from the outside rather than actually trusting oneself, and so I feel the tech is the sort of like stepping stone towards just trusting yourself, which is ultimately the state that you want to be in.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that's sort of as a rhetorical strategy, if that's a point you want to make, then I think that's something worth highlighting at the beginning. because I think that, going through sort of, going through X minutes of sort of the science and sort of quantified self type thing, and then saying it's about how you feel is, it kind of, it deflates that important message. And I think that, sort of that while in a sense, what you want to, it sounds like what you want to do is sort of represent the quantification of the data as, sort of existing to reflection and self-awareness, sort of like tuning a guitar versus playing a guitar, right? There were great tools that can help you tune a guitar very exactly. But that is not the same as being able to play the guitar well. And that, so but I, anyway, but I think that's that's an excellent point to make, and it's a good enough point to make early, which then connects to the final thing, which is that on the first page of Flow, right, Csikszentmihalyi asks the question, what makes for a good life? Right? It is the same question that Aristotle and sort of, every major philosopher has asked since the beginning of philosophy. He's not asking questions about optimal performance or about increasing productivity levels among knowledge workers. He wants to know what makes us happy, what gives us a sense of satisfaction throughout the course of our lives. And that was, and his work on flow is intimately connected with that. And I think that and he talks indeed in the book about, both the various qualities that define flow, but also warns that it is possible to achieve these in ways that sort of ultimately are detrimental. That, Bobby Fischer, for example, was someone who was brilliantly capable of entering into a state of flow when he played chess, and arguably it destroyed his life. And it is, and this is, I think that, again, this is something that I spend time trying to get right in my own work on this, which is that that it is, it's easy to take the video game designer approach and to describe flow as these X things, which you can then achieve through these kinds of triggers and this much stuff in the loot box and the UI that works this way, and bam, you've got flow. And I think, and Csikszentmihalyi, I asked him about this, and he said, no, that's not really what I mean. And that disconnecting the kind of physiological and behavioral stuff from from activities that have some deeper meaning in our lives, or that potentially can contribute to that, is, he saw that as really problematic. So anyway, I think that most of the time, audiences aren't really going to be thinking about that. They're going to be asking, right, what can I do for my team to encourage, to help ignite those states, and then what, as a leader or an office manager, can I do to help sustain that, right? To how can I design an environment that lets people stay in flow once they get there? Not so much how does this connect with with living a good life, but still, I think it's, this is powerful enough stuff so that I think we ought to worry about it when we write about it.
It's a really solid point, and I feel that's also, for me personally, I find the more I'm refining my life, that what I do is in alignment with what's meaningful to me, the more there is flow. And it's,
absolutely,
it's this really interconnected piece where figuring out what are actually the things that are really meaningful to me, then feed back into the data. And that, yeah, it's an interesting loop. And it's good that you mentioned as well with regards to the audiences.
Yeah,
because I feel obviously on LinkedIn we have much more of a business productivity is like, okay, boom.
Absolutely.
Let's talk less about the spiritual aspect, which I think would
Right.
be fun to actually do with you on a one-to-one conversation, because I feel we are philosophically really aligned.
And yet, but I would also add that I think that there is a non-trivial percentage of business audiences who would be very receptive to the idea, or to the kind of rhetorical move that, yes, this is a way of working better, but ultimately it also is a way, it's a practice and a set of tools that can help you live a richer, more fulfilling life. And at a moment when we are all talking about the future of work and how to reinvent work to make it more meaningful, or bring more balance into our lives, etc., in the shadow of 2 years of economic disruption and millions of people who are no longer with us because of a pandemic that none of us managed well, these questions, I think that people are open to questions about about how we can work in ways that help us live better lives and be better people in a way that we might not have been. These are top of mind in a way that they were not, sort of in January 2020. So I think that there is a space for talking about this that you should not be shy of going into.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
So yeah, and I am seeing with sort of the companies that are signing up for 4-day, for 4-day week trials, that fewer of them are trying to solve like recruitment, retention, burnout problems. They all want improvements along those lines, but they are motivated less by a driving sense that if we don't solve our recruitment problem in the next 12 months, we're going to go out of business. And they're more about how can we make work better for ourselves and our people. And there's a whole suite of things that they hope to get out of it. Nobody wants to do things that are that cost them money and business, but there is this notable shift in what is getting people thinking about a 4-day week. And it's less about operational stuff and more about and it's more about the future of work and just making work better overall. So that tells me that this is a moment when you can talk about flow at work and sort of flow as a key to a good life, and people will actually people will be intrigued by the idea that those are the same things.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you so much.
So yeah,
I'll go to Savi.
Yeah. Anyway, with that, unfortunately, I've kept you way over, and I've got to go on to other things. So, okay. But this was great, and I want to follow up with some other stuff too. So
yeah, please, let's do this.
Yeah. So we'll talk more.
Great to see you.
Okay, awesome. See you later. Bye.
Hi, Toby. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Savi. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. Good. I'm doing great. And congrats, first of all, Toby. I think this topic is very interesting for us. I have maybe 2 kind of questions I would like to make you. I have tried to find a similar equipment, HRV equipment like the one you're using, but for instance, here in Spain, I am not finding something similar to it. Maybe could you please suggest any other manufacturer or something that we can find elsewhere in Europe or something like that? Because I find this interesting. I would like at some point to begin trying it. And yeah, I was not really aware on how complex or how, let's say, industrial or efficient should be this kind of equipment, or if you just have a very simple one, is more than enough to begin with. I was having that technical stuff doubts, let's say.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, the easiest thing that you can do without like any money investment is you could download an app called Valtory. I'll just put here the name in the chat. Or maybe it's with a double L. Let me just check out spell. Yeah, double L. Yeah, and that app basically does the thing where you just put your finger on the back and it reads your heart rate variability for, I think, 3 minutes or a minute and a half or something. And then it gives you a short-term assessment of like how your nervous system is doing.
Okay, but what about the kind of band you're using?
That stuff. So they ship it like all over the world. If you go to autonomhealth.com,
okay,
you can order one to Spain, and yeah.
Okay, and just one last thing. Could you please, Toby, share the slides and the video? I was not able to engage since the beginning of the call, but I really would like to understand like the main principles and let's say the relevance of HRP for all what you already have been discussed. And if you could please share it via link on LinkedIn, because I didn't get enrolled into the registering link, but I just got a link via LinkedIn directly.
Sorry, can you, if you just put your email address in the chat, I'll
Sure.
add you to the list of participants, and then when I'll send out the slides and the recording tomorrow, then you will get that email as well.
Thank you.
Sweet.
Okay,
Anything else you wanted to ask?
Not really. Hope to keep in touch. And as I told you in the chat, this is a very nice project. You will have great contributions on this, and thank you, Toby, for the information and the shares you always have with us. Thank you, and keep rocking it.
Thanks so much, brother. Much love.
Bye bye.
See you, man. And Julia, how can I help you?
I have two things. One, I have big problem to set up goals. They scare the shit out of me.
Okay.
Every time I think to set up goals, my anxiety level go up. And I think it's a fear to not be able to meet them.
Yeah.
So even small stuff like, okay, make the bed in the first hour, by the time wake up, think, oh my God, now I have a goal. Oh shit. And the other thing that I have a resistance for that, a lot of these flow book they talk about being more productive, be more efficient, and for me feel like you won't transform in a machine where everything needs to work perfectly well and always have a peak of your performance. And I said, no, thanks. I'm good. I don't want to become like an extremist in a sense where it's all work, always need to be at the best level that you can reach in general. And you cannot just, relax and enjoy what you're doing.
So regards to the goals, maybe as a start, is do you actually want to do it?
What do you mean?
Like, do you want to do the bed? Maybe you're just a person that doesn't want to make the bed, maybe it's just not.
No, it actually make me feel better when it's nice, and then say, okay, my room look better just because the bed is done.
It might also be quite interesting to actually see what your overall lifestyle looks like. Because when you were saying that you work like 10 to 11 hour shifts and always need you to be
when I'm lucky. I have some trouble to find jobs right now. So majority of the time I'm sitting home, try to figure it out how to get more jobs. But when I'm on set, I'm good. I can go like 13, 14 days. And actually more it goes, more my energy go up. So the first 3 days are kind of, your body start to get used to the long hours, long time on your feet, moving equipment. And then by the end of the project, I'm tired, but at the same time, I have so much more energy than when I start.
Interesting. So it almost sounds that you're needing an environment that's more similar to that environment that you're in. And right now you're actually in a space that isn't really stimulating you.
Yes, but at the same time, I'm not able to, and I still need to learn how to stimulate myself. When I'm by myself, just like, okay, so I can, I can apply for a job tomorrow. No, nothing is gonna happen. Or, even small thing, I can do that tomorrow. I can do laundry tomorrow. It's always like,
but it may also be this like procrastination piece that, your body is actually really, it's really tired and it just needs time.
And I'm okay. And that's the thing, it's okay when, I just finish a 3 days job. I'm okay to take the day off and do nothing for the day. The problem then, sometimes it's the nature of the beast. You have a couple of months where you don't have project coming in, or you have, you're talking with producer, director, and you start to put together a project, but it's not something that, is a 9 to 5 job. So I need to be able to sit down by myself, go through the script and analyze, breaking down the script for a photography point of view, and then go to the meeting and discuss about it. And a lot of time I find myself that I don't do that at home, but then my brain wake up to talk about, but it's not the best way. I mean, you need to do both, because you need to arrive to a meeting, prepare and say, okay, that's what I think, that's what we need. What are your idea? And then you start to going back and forth with the other person.
I mean, to me, what it appears is like there's actually, you already know all the answers. It's that instead of just going through a script by yourself, you don't need to just discuss it in the meeting. But what seems like a helpful environment is that you're sitting down with someone to actually speak about it, because your energy comes out.
Yeah, but it's not always possible. That's a problem. It's not like, sometimes it's not possible to have someone to bounce idea with. So, and I'm in the need to learn the skill to be creative by myself. And then, so then I can, when I'm gonna reach a point that I can hire an assistant just to bounce idea out of it. Yeah, great. But until then, I need to be able to be my own bouncing board in a way.
Yeah, that could be one path to go. And the other path could be the path of self-compassion, and just realizing that the way you work best, you already know how you work best, and just find environments so that you can work this way. Maybe there's like other people in your area that also work better when they actually work with others together, and maybe kind of like co-working spaces for sort of the creative industries, and effectively to give yourself, because it sounds like you get energized by being around other people.
Yes,
and what it appears to be right now. See, this is
yeah, it's a nice combination.
You're sort of like stepping into your peers. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a couple of ways, if you want to explore this more depth, we could do some analysis of your heart rate variability and then just figure out what's going on. Or yeah, if you wanted to do sort of like more focus on kind of like the goal setting and things like that, could also coach you if you wanted to for a few weeks, and that could potentially be a helpful container.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna reach out to you about that.
Yeah.
Right now I don't have a schedule. It's crazy time. It change like every few minutes. It changed my schedule. Yes.
Yeah, no,
But
just
yeah,
get
no.
into it.
But yeah, no, I'm gonna, yeah, goal settings, big trouble. But it's something that I need to be able to do, or I'm gonna keep stuck where I am.
Yeah, it definitely builds self-trust. And
Yeah.
I feel starting with small ones is good. Then it allows you to have bigger and bigger.
Okay. Well, thank you for today.
Amazing.
Nice to see you
Thank
again.
you for coming. Yeah, it's great to see you as well.
And talk to you soon.
Yeah, much love. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.